Hey YouTube, Joe Boy here. Today I want to talk about Gear 4th. As I've said in a previous theory, and a lot of people agree with and have said in the past as well, I believe that Gear 4th has multiple forms. Because Gear 4th is the only gear so far revealed that Luffy has that he specifically named, which he named Bound Man, or as a lot of people from my last video want me to call it, Bounce Man. Either way, whatever you want to call it, it has a name. And so Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd don't have names. And so this really makes Gear 4th really interesting. And then when you think about the purpose of a name, it's to distinguish itself from other things. And so Gear 4th in and of itself distinguishes it from the other gears by the name alone. It's Gear 4th, meaning it's not Gear 3rd or Gear 2nd. But on top of being Gear 4th, it's also Bounce Man. And so this should also then differentiate it from other forms among the Gear 4th forms Luffy could potentially have, which would go by other names. And as a side note, I see a lot of people in the comment section from my last video saying that Gear 4th doesn't have multiple forms because Gear 3rd also has another name, and that's Bone Balloon. And so I want to debunk this, which is that, yes, Gear 3rd was called Bone Balloon, but this is sort of a word to describe in essence what the gear is, which is Luffy blowing air into his bones to make them grow. Gear 4th also has this same kind of name, which is called Muscle Balloon. So both Gear 3rd and Gear 4th have a name, Bone and Muscle Balloon. But Gear 4th has another name on top of that, which is Bounce Man, which is its actual name. So Gear 3rd and Gear 4th share this initial name of Bone Balloon and Muscle Balloon, but what makes Gear 4th unique is it has this additional name of Bounce Man, and this is what keys us in to the possibility that Gear 4th has multiple forms. I hope that makes sense to you. So with all this being explained, let's actually get into the topic of this video, which is I want to try and take my stab at what I think the other forms of Gear 4th will be. And don't be discouraged by the length of this video. This video is just chock full of really awesome speculations and theories, and I think my conclusion is something that you can really get behind if you watch the entire thing. So I think this is a hype video, so just watch the whole damn thing. And this is given my own logic. If somebody else has already said what I'm about to say, I haven't read it before, but please let me know. But this is just my own pure logic about the situation, about what we know about Gear 4th. So without further ado, let's just get into this. So the first thing, and the most important thing, where I think that a lot of people are messing up about their speculations about future Gear 4th forms, is the main speculation that I see, in fact really the only logical explanation that I see, is that back in the past we saw that in a flashback as Luffy was showing us Gear 4th for the first time, he goes back and we see a gorilla, a lion, and like some other animal. And so a lot of people use this as potential foreshadowing, which is that Gear 4th looks like a gorilla. So the other forms of Gear 4th will resemble these other animals that are present in this panel. And this I highly disagree with, mainly because in order for it to be another form of Gear 4th, it still has to be Gear 4th, otherwise it wouldn't be Gear 4th, it would go by another name, it would be another gear, Gear 5th and Gear 6. And so in essence, the same logic that creates Gear 4th, Bound Man or Bounce Man would have to apply for all the other forms of Gear 4th, meaning that he would blow into his muscles to make them larger. And so I think that the reason why he resembles a gorilla so much is that Monkey D. Luffy already is inspired by Sun Wukong. He himself is a human, which is from genetics most closely related to gorillas rather than lions, so therefore humans look more naturally like a gorilla. And when he blows himself up like he does in Gear 4th, of course, given how this works and how Oda decided to draw it, he would resemble more closely a gorilla, but I don't think any of his other forms in Gear 4th are going to represent any other animals. We can actually already see that these animals inspired Luffy's attacks in Gear 4th. By their names we can tell this, but I don't think it'll inspire the other forms of Gear 4th. So with that established, I don't believe that particular theory, and now I'm going to try and best as I can explain my theory. And first, let's explain my understanding of Gear 4th. And so the most interesting thing about Gear 4th, the thing that really, I think, unlocks its secrets the most is an understanding of what happens after Gear 4th ends, which after Gear 4th ends, Luffy loses his haki for 10 minutes. Now, why is this the case? Why does Luffy lose his haki? And I think the answer to this unlocks the other forms of Gear 4th, which is that, as we see while in Gear 4th, Luffy wheezes. Without necessarily being damaged, he also puffs out air almost constantly while in this form. And then we see immediately after Gear 4th ends and he loses his haki, all the air that he initially blew into his muscles comes out of him until he reverts back into his normal stage, which suggests that this air that's within him is being forced to stay there by Luffy's haki. So basically, this suggests that without haki, Luffy never would have been able to master Gear 4th in the first place, because unlike Gear 3rd, where he blew into his bones, he didn't need haki in order to keep that air there. He could just fight as in his normal state with Gear 3rd until, I guess at some point, he loses the ability to hold that air in there with just his own tools, and then it comes out. But with Gear 4th and the air that he blows into his muscles, the air does not want to stay there. In order to keep it there and continue getting the effects of Gear 4th, he needs his haki in order to keep it there. This also explains why there's no Gear 4th version without his body covered in haki. And so the impression that I get is that this is hugely taxing on Luffy and his haki. He's basically maxed out his haki the entire time that he uses Gear 4th. He uses it to its fullest extent, to the max, in order to keep himself in Gear 4th, and even then some air constantly escapes him as he fights, despite him trying to keep it in. And so the impression that I get is that due to this overuse of his haki, in order to maintain Gear 4th, there comes a point in time where his haki runs out, and that's the point in time where Gear 4th ends. And the reason why that Gear 4th has a huge drawback, which is that after it ends, he's not allowed to use haki again for 10 minutes until he gets it back. And so another thing worth mentioning is that as Luffy's haki improves, I imagine he should be able to maintain Gear 4th longer. Basically, Gear 4th duration is completely relying on Luffy's ability to keep that air within his muscles, which is due to haki. So if his haki improves, gets stronger, then he should be able to maintain Gear 4th longer. And this is going to become even more important as I get further into the theory. And so the major proof for this comes from when Luffy uses King Kong Gun, which King Kong Gun is an attack, but essentially what it is, it's Gear 4th in combination with Gear 3rd. He's already in Gear 4th, and then he uses Gear 3rd, and he blows air additionally into his bones to create the huge arm, which he then uses for the attack King Kong Gun. And so what's most interesting about this is when he uses King Kong Gun, his haki changes. This was actually something that I didn't notice while reading the manga because it was very much unclear. It was a small detail. But when watching the anime, it becomes a lot much clearer because they draw attention to it, which is that when he uses King Kong Gun, his haki becomes much more extended. It covers more of his body. And this would make sense because Luffy is just larger in this form. And so he needs to cover more of his body with haki in order to prevent himself from losing all of the air that's in his body. And so as a side note, we can draw from this speculation, which is that Luffy can't use King Kong Gun very often while in Gear 4th because this would hugely reduce the amount of time he's able to maintain Gear 4th as a whole. And the existence of King Kong Gun itself offers up the possibility that Luffy will, at some point in the future, combine Gear 2nd and Gear 4th. And I think this would not require an extended amount of haki. It would just make Gear 4th even faster and even stronger. But I'm doubtful that this will be the other form of Gear 4th in the first place, because we can see that he combined Gear 3rd and Gear 4th and he didn't name it a new form. So I'm skeptical that a combination of Gear 2nd and Gear 4th will go by another name either. But it will be, or could be, potentially something that happens in the future. It's even possible that as it stands right now, Luffy, in his current Gear 4th form, Bounce Man, isn't able to use Gear 2nd, potentially because of the strain that Gear 4th already has on his body, how much effort and willpower it takes to keep that air inside of his body. Just adding that extra strain of Gear 2nd would maybe prevent Luffy from maintaining Gear 4th as long as he currently does. And so that's why he hasn't currently used Gear 2nd with Gear 4th. But there's the possibility that if he reduces the stress that Gear 4th has on his body, that he could combine it with Gear 2nd. Or another way of looking at it is that maybe Luffy hasn't yet been put in a situation in which he needs to use this attack that combines Gear 2nd and Gear 4th. Keep in mind that I've already speculated that doing this would potentially reduce the duration of Gear 4th, so this is sort of an in-game tactic. And so far he's only been in one situation where he was forced to use an in-game tactic with Gear 4th, and that was when he was fighting Doflamingo and he used King Kong Gun. That was the only time. So without this second opportunity to show off what he can do with Gear 4th, then he could have already mastered the ability to use Gear 2nd and Gear 4th, but just hasn't showed us yet. And I think this goes back to really what he needed to defeat Doflamingo, which is that Gear 3rd was remarked upon as being sort of at the, before pre-time skip, was his ultimate attack power form. It gave him the most just singular attack power. And so in the fight versus Doflamingo, Doflamingo was injured, he didn't have much left, and really all Luffy needed to do was finish him off, and he wasn't really worried about Doflamingo's speed. And so with this being said, a combination of Gear 2nd and Gear 4th wasn't necessary because Luffy didn't really need that extra speed that Gear 2nd provides. What he needed was that extra attack power to get through Doflamingo's defenses and then knock him out. So with that being said, with this fight versus Cracker that seemingly happened last chapter and we didn't get to see what happened, I highly speculate that speed is really what's necessary to defeat Cracker to get to his main body and around all of his biscuit shields. And so with this being said, a combination of Gear 2nd and Gear 4th might actually be what he needed or needs to defeat Cracker, rather than Gear 3rd and Gear 4th. That extra speed to attack Cracker's body straight on. This could very well be one of the other forms of Gear 4th that Luffy has yet to unveil. I'm still skeptical, I'm on the fence because Gear 3rd and Gear 4th, the combination of those abilities, did not produce a new Gear 4th form, a named new Gear 4th form, so it would suggest that a combination of Gear 2nd and Gear 4th also wouldn't be named. But given that I do think that this combination will happen, it's very possible that this is one of the other forms of Gear 4th. But I have another idea as to what another form of Gear 4th could be, and this one I'm more sold on than the last one. Which is that if we look at Gear 4th, what is its main glaring weakness right now? It's incredibly strong. It's incredibly fast. It gets the job done, but for only a short amount of time. How can Luffy increase the duration of Gear 4th? Could this potentially be the other form, or one of the other forms of Gear 4th? I think so. And so let's go back to Haki now. So Haki, Luffy seemingly uses this Haki in order to maintain Gear 4th. And it seems like he basically stretches his ability to use Haki all the way to the max. And he covers literally as much of his body as possible in order to keep that air within his muscles. And so really the simplest solution for what the other form of Gear 4th would be a form in which Luffy wouldn't have to expend so much Haki in order to keep the air that he blows into his muscles there. Basically what I'm suggesting is that Luffy in the future would blow less air into his muscles. And so in this form, if his body does not grow to the size that it does in Gear 4th, if there's just less air present there, then he would need to use less Haki in order to keep the air there. He could cover more of his body, like as far as like proportionally, with his Haki, and then also use less of it at the same time, thus increasing the duration of Gear 4th to a point to which he could potentially use it for an entire fight. But don't get me wrong, I do think that this would drastically decrease the amount of fighting power that Gear 4th possesses. As we saw with the fight versus Doflamingo, Gear 4th Luffy, Bounce Man, was just incredibly stronger than Doflamingo. It wasn't even close. So we must ask ourselves, just how strong is Gear 4th? Gear 4th also, I believe, is incredibly stronger than Cracker. But the difference between Cracker and Doflamingo is Cracker has A+ defenses. He can spawn this biscuit, these biscuit shields and prevent Luffy from landing a strike on his main body until Gear 4th runs out, and then Luffy is just screwed. So I think that Luffy could get the job done in Gear 4th with less power and still be able to defeat his opponents, and so that's why I think that this is a very viable Gear 4th form. And then on top of that, he could actually potentially be as strong as Gear 4th if he combines this other form of Gear 4th with Gear 2nd. As I said, it's a possibility that he can't combine Gear 2nd with his Bounce Man because Gear 2nd would just add that extra bit of toll on his body that he can't really take. And so with that being said, the duration in which he could use Gear 2nd with Gear 4th would be highly reduced, and vastly reduce the amount of time he's able to be in Gear 4th. But if he's using less Haki in a form that he can pretty much maintain indefinitely throughout the entirety of the fight, then he could also potentially add Gear 2nd to this as well, and then also maintain this duration for a lot longer. So basically, this would be the form that would allow Luffy to combine Gear 2nd and Gear 4th in a viable manner. And so this is also important, and I need to bring up, Gear 4th Bounce Man is called Bounce Man. And so then how could another form have a different name? If Luffy is blowing air into his muscles, then they should theoretically all bounce. But I think this might not be true in a form in which he blows less air into his muscles. With less air there, he might be less bouncy, and therefore this form would get a different name. Whereas Bounce Man, being its defining tribute, is just bouncing around all over the place. If he blows less air into his muscles, there's a possibility that Luffy isn't as bouncy, and therefore that's why it would have a different name other than Bounce Man. And as a side note, I don't think that this form would be what he needs to take on Kaido and possibly defeat Kaido. I think in the fight versus Kaido, he actually needs more fighting power. So with this being said, it opens the possibility up for another Gear 4th form, which is that what if Luffy blows more air into his muscles? So this also would be a form that he could not maintain for very long. But at the same time, in One Piece logic, as we see with Gear 3rd, bigger is stronger, even if it doesn't necessarily make sense for that to be the case. And so if this is true, if Luffy blows more air into his muscles, it would take more Haki in order for him to maintain that form, but at the same time, it would cause more damage. And so this could be potentially something that he uses in the future for somebody who just doesn't take damage very well, someone like Kaido. But again, I don't think that this would be the kind of thing that would defeat Kaido, but perhaps another person that's incredibly strong defensively. But yeah, guys, I've rambled on here for almost 20 minutes. This video is ridiculously long, but I feel like every single thing that I said was of importance, and I don't think a lot of what I've said has been said previously, at least has become popular. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you agree or disagree and why. Like the video if you like the video. I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. And as always, dudes, have a wonderful day.